Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. A big talking point lately within Black Ops 6 and also Warzone as well, kind of simultaneously, is Omnimovement. Obviously, going into the year, Omnimovement, the most advanced movement, or boots on the ground movement, I should say, that we've seen in COD to date. The ability to have 360 based movement. You can slide, dive, prone in any which way, any which direction, right? So in theory, it's going to be the smoothest, the most fluid movement we've seen. Except that's not necessarily the case. In fact, there's been a lot of situations that players have discovered and tested where Omnimovement has actually gone in reverse. And this has been quite the controversial topic as of late. And today, we're actually getting a discussion and a breakdown from Treyarch, from the devs themselves, in regards to some of the changes that were made here. So initially, this tweet was brought to my attention. TCaptainX, fellow creator here, ended up posting about this, but there was this TikTok made kind of showing off some of the movement speed comparisons with some simple things that aren't necessarily directly tied to Omnimovement as a whole, you know, dating back to Modern Warfare 2019, which is oftentimes considered to be the best movement. Now, that's subjective, but that's part of what made the game so popular. Things like crouch spamming, being able to bunny hop in gunfights. The time it takes to go prone and get back up is even wildly different here, just showing off how different the speeds are in a game where movement was a talking point, but it wasn't the main talking point, compared to a game where movement was all the hype going in. And TCaptainX goes through and actually breaks down some interesting things, you know, saying, I love Omnimovement. What's the point of all the core movement mechanics being super slow, and you have absurd weapon sway? It just takes away from what the foundation of Omnimovement seemed to present going into the year. The casual player is probably barely scratching the surface of utilizing Omnimovement, which is definitely true there. That's why they have all the assists put into place. But these movements shown here are the ones that 90% of the player base uses frequently, and that's what's feeling slow and clunky. You know, the crouch and the prone speeds are pretty crazy. The weapon bob and the weapon sway when you're jumping, when you're sliding, so on and so forth. Reloads, plating, mantling, all this stuff has been wildly adjusted on top of Omnimovement. So yes, you have the crazy ability with the slides in any direction, the diving, the cool things you can do with prone, and how you can tether all that together. But then these other core things that are involved in almost every single gunfight have taken large steps back. It's a really interesting yet drastic change here that goes pro in some way, but also goes back or cons in the other. And TCaptainX makes this whole post talking about how he disagrees with some of these changes, and it just so happens we actually got a response from a Treyarch dev. And it's not just any Treyarch dev, it's Matt Scronce, who's one of the leads on the game, according to his Twitter bio. Of course, he's the Associate Director of Design at Treyarch, so Matt's doing a lot. He's been around the franchise for some time. If you've been a follower and a viewer here on the channel for a couple of years, we've talked about Matt in previous Black Ops titles as well. And someone tagged him and said, hey, we believe, could you give us some answers here? And Matt Scronce basically goes through in details why they made some of these changes and the design philosophy behind some of these. Also talks a bit about if we could ever see these things adjusted. And the reason I wanted to highlight this is because, quite frankly, we as Call of Duty players just don't really see this level of transparency with a lot of these significant changes, and that's exactly what these are when it comes to gameplay fluidity and movement. And so as we go through and we break down Matt's response here, quick reminder, if you're new to the channel, every single day I got you covered with everything you need to know in COD, whether it's news, updates, announcements, meta breakdowns even. It's all right here, so feel free to hit that subscribe button, turn on those post notifications. We are obviously getting closer and closer to crossing that 1 million milestone. And if you enjoy this video, a like would be seriously appreciated as well. It helps the channel grow. Share the video around to new viewers. But here's what Matt has to say about the movement here. So once prone and crouch speeds become too fast, you end up with mismatch between first and third person POV, which then leads to snaking, which has been a massive problem in the past. We'll go through, I'll actually change up the face cam here so we can see his full wording. Faster is not always healthier for the overall game experience. And this is actually an interesting point, because this is something that's been a very big discussion in previous years, particularly MW3. Sledgehammer focused a lot on the snaking issue, especially from competitive gameplay. It's always something, hey, should this be in the core gameplay? Are we going to GA it like in the CDO, where they say, okay, hey, it's in the game, but we're not going to abuse this. If you do abuse it, you're breaking the rules, the gentleman agreement stuff, where they basically get rid of 90% of the gameplay, right? But you know, that's something I think a lot of people can sit there and say, okay, you know, that proves a good point. Snaking, it breaks cameras, it's just an awkward thing. It does certainly introduce a skill gap, but a lot of players, including the top of the top, don't even enjoy that as like a core feature, hence why they GA it. So they start with the design around that. Now, Matt goes on to say, I've personally never been a fan of spamming jump during combat, so he doesn't want to see every single engagement just be a jump shot into another jump shot into a B hop into another jump shot, right? So when we intentionally designed Omni movement mechanics, we adjusted the sway and bob when jumping by default to ensure that wasn't the most effective tactic during engagements. So the weapon bob and the weapon sway that a lot of players are not a huge fan of right now is actually something that they deliberately designed to be that way when you are using movement in a gunfight, particularly jumping, which is interesting because at the same time, weapon bob and weapon sway, just as a core mechanic, obviously is going to throw all players off a little bit, but it also deliberately hurts keyboard and mouse players where they don't have that aim assist correction potentially helping them out in a fight. That's why weapon sway and idle sway and stuff like that back in Modern Warfare 2 was such a huge deal, because it was hurting keyboard and mouse players so much when they go into gunfights. They just were at a distinct disadvantage the entire time. So that as the design choice, I think is kind of interesting because it does kind of alienate keyboard and mouse players even further where they're already disadvantaged some because of aim assist is just a general topic. Now, of course, that's a whole conversation for a different day. But Matt continues on by saying, if you want to spam jump while shooting, we do have perks and attachments to increase effectiveness there, just like we do for slide and dive. So you can increase your slide to fire or your dive to fire speeds. You can have a better jump shot ADS speed and stuff like that, but you're forced to go out of your way to implement that into your gameplay by burning an attachment or by burning a perk. Whereas in previous Call of Duties, even as recent as Warzone last year, which we'll talk about here in just a moment, these were just kind of default things. But he does go on to say, all that said, we're always looking at feedback, data, and discussing our internal opinions across partner studios on how the game is playing in order to continue making improvements. So basically saying, hey, there's enough feedback saying maybe we should look into this. Perhaps it's something that does get done. There's no confirmation that because of this discussion, they're going to change these speeds or they're always going to keep it this way because that's how Matt likes it personally, right? For jump shots and whatnot. But it is interesting to see this level of detail actually explained by a dev saying, hey, we specifically don't want this to be a crutch in gunfights. We want you to use attachments. We want you to use perks. From their POV, that obviously is going to diversify things from a playstyle experience to a certain extent. As a casual player, though, there are some cons to this, and it's largely viewed as a step backwards because of what we've seen before. And I think this is maybe part of the issue when you have a bunch of cooks in the kitchen in the case of Call of Duty, where every year the lead developer is different. It's Infinity Ward who have their design, Treyarch who have their design, Sledgehammer who have their design, and then Raven who's kind of got to combine all of it into Warzone every year and then make changes on the fly with much less dev time than the actual individual studios working on the premium titles. So for instance, Isaac ends up posting a tweet in response. There's some discussion about movement, like Fortnite just dropped a new update or is about to drop a new update. Not sure when this video is going live, where they're actually doing some pretty crazy movement things, which is honestly kind of cool. Like I might re-download the game and go and check it out. But things like this are very apparent now. Faster mantles and weapon swaps and like sleight of hand being in the game, general reloads and stuff. That was all default in Modern Warfare 3 Warzone. They made a big talking point at COD Next last year for MW3 Warzone about how every player was going to have base perks essentially applied to them, where their movement was better, their mantling was better, weapon swaps were better. It was all faster, more fluid, and that seemed to play really well in gameplay coming off MW2, where if you wanted that stuff, it was either a perk or just didn't exist. The design was super clunky and super awkward. Scope sway, reticle bobbing, partial fall damage were not in OG Warzone, but were added in during Warzone 2 and haven't been removed. And this is stuff that, again, for years now has been a big talking point because it's adding even more of a disadvantage to keyboard and mouse players, having to keep up with no aim assist, but then also RNG with your scope sway and your bounce and your view bob and everything like that. We've had times where it was more, where it was maybe less during MW3, and now in BO6 it's very noticeable again. So these are things that a lot of the community does view as steps back or downgrades, as Isaac says here, and yet the devs give their clear definitive answer, or a dev gives his clear definitive answer of saying, hey, this is what design, we want you to focus on, that stuff with your own individual setups. It won't be a universal thing. So an interesting conversation for sure. I do think it is cool that we actually get that level of insight just because we rarely do from devs, but curious to know your thoughts on the subject. In regards to movement and fluidity, do you like what they've changed with BO6, where it's more focus on sliding and diving and proning with Omni movement and less focus on some of these other default things in a gunfight, whether it's reloads, weapon swap, jump shotting, bunny hopping, and things of that nature. Do wish it was Omnimovement stacked on top of maybe what we had during MW3 Warzone, where a lot of that stuff was applied to your characters by default, and you didn't have to go out of your way to potentially limit a class setup by focusing on something like that for those one-off situations. I imagine it's going to be a discussion for some time regardless, but like I said, I definitely want to get y'all's thoughts on it down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, a like would be seriously appreciated, and of course, if you're new to the channel, you want to guarantee that every single day you are in the know for all things going on in COD, feel free to hit that subscribe button on your way out. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, take it easy, have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you later. Peace out.